You are listening to Live Free with Rebecca Packard. With this podcast, Rebecca will help spiritual entrepreneurs and mompreneurs experience emotional freedom so that they can create calm and balance in all areas of their life. If you're ready to release your emotional baggage, trauma, and that constant feeling of overwhelm, then you are in the right place. Your journey starts now. Here's your host, Rebecca Packard.
Hi, welcome back. It's Rebecca Packard, and we have a fantastic guest today joining us. We have James Early, and I'm really excited for him to be here because I heard him through a really great group that I'm a part of, the Pod Pals. You've heard me talk about them before. And he has a podcast called The Bible Speaks to You. And I really love the way that James is showing up in the world, sharing how there's all these different ideas and perspectives, and the Bible itself can be taken very analytically, and it can also be taken very openly on what people perceive it to be. And he has these open conversations on his podcast. And one of the things that really drew me to him was the way that he talked about his podcast, but also the space of what he's doing in the world with his work. And he has been a prison minister, and he's also been a homeschool dad. Like, he's done a lot of different things where he has used different tools to help him to move through the space of what life means and what the best space of what life can be for him. So, James, hi, thank you for being here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's great to be here. That's quite an introduction.
Like, I was listening to you talk and I was so excited because not a lot of people openly come to that space of what you shared, in the space of, I just want to help people come back to what the Bible means to them, not to the projected, not to what the world tells you it has to say, but what does it mean to them, for them to walk their life, is really what I got from what you were saying in that space. And so I'd love for you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what your podcast talks about, and then I'd really love to talk about your prison ministry and how you're showing up in that space.
Okay, cool. So the whole thing about my podcast is I'm trying to get back to the original Christianity of Jesus, not all the 2,000 years of things that we have added on. I mean, it's interesting to see what people say about Jesus, especially the further back you go in history. But so many times, even especially today in the world, people are claiming to be Jesus followers, but they're not exactly following what Jesus said we should do. Things like love your enemy. I mean, that's a pretty hard command, but he says we should love our enemies. And usually, well, that's just hard for anybody, even when you're trying to do it. But some people are kind of doing the opposite, who claim that they love Jesus. So I want to get back to, what did Jesus actually say? What did he expect us to do? How did he think? What was his mindset in the world? How did he see people? How did he interact with people, including the social outcasts of the day? He always, responded to them. He met their needs. He talked to people that he wasn't supposed to, and he frequented with them, and he got criticized for it, but he was there to help the people that needed help. And I think too many times when we combine Christianity with politics or any other kind of thing, we lose track of what Jesus's original message was. We don't practice what his original practice was. So, and the other thing about my podcast is I want people to experience God's healing presence in their lives. I've had lots of healings, both physical sicknesses and illnesses or conditions, but also, emotional and spiritual and mental healings, situations where, you get yourself out of the way, and God can come in. The presence of divine love can come in and redeem the situation, correct the situation, reveal the answer, whatever, whatever. So that's what I'm trying to help people see with my podcast. I don't remember the other things you asked.
That's okay. Yeah. I love that because I come to a space, I live in New England, and I come to a space of having conversations with a lot of people who have turned their back on religion due to, well, I had this nun in school, or I had this
Right.
interaction with a priest. And I said, but that's not Jesus.
Right.
That's a man. That's a woman. That's an outside third party space, and they were living on their behalf of what they believed to be their truth with their emotional baggage and their preconditioned notions and all of their things on them, and then you were put in their path. So I love that you're like, let's go back to the space of remembering that there's a separation in those things.
Well, you talked about the homeschooling years. One thing that we did in our homeschooling that I think was really important, we always tried to get to original texts and see what, read the letters that Abraham Lincoln wrote. We read books about Abraham Lincoln, but we would try to go back to original sources and original documents. And that was good because you get the unvarnished, uncommented upon whatever it is. Whether you agree or not, it's not so much the point, but you learn what was actually being said. And I think we need to do that with the Bible and go back and let it see what it says without, and it's hard to separate out our filters and our cultural lenses and perspectives. But I think the more we try to do that and say, well, what is this actually saying? And sometimes I'll be reading a Bible passage and it's like, oh, I never noticed that before. But you have to go with an open mind, even if you think you know what it already says.
Well, and I love that. That's every day. You have to go with an open mind because you don't know what's going to happen. And you may think you know, but you don't know, right? You may be like, oh, I read this 5 times. This is what my idea of it is.
Right.
And then the next thing is like, oh no.
or you've seen part of it, but there's more to it. And we just always keep learning. I think that's the important thing. And I've noticed from my prison ministry and talking to people of lots of different denominations, some people have more faith in their theology than they do in God. And so I think we need to get back to, let's have a relationship with this infinite presence that we call God. That's just a word. It's different in different languages, but what is this infinite presence of divine love, of infinite spirit, whatever you want to call this spiritual presence and cause and power and force? We have a relationship with that. To me, it's a cause and effect relationship, creator-creation relationship. And I think when you understand how it's like the sunlight being related to the sun, each one of us is like a little ray of sunlight. You can't take the sunlight and separate it from the sun. And I don't think we can be separated from God. We may think we are, but we're really not. Anyway.
I agree with that. I agree with that because a lot of the times when you have those conversations with people who believe that they're completely separate, there's still that you get to this conversation where you kind of take them, you're like, Alice, come down the rabbit hole with me. And it all goes back to a space of the day that they decided to be separate. And usually that's a traumatic space, or it's a space where something didn't work the way that they thought it should have, where they were hurt. And why did this happen to me? And so I love that you say that it's there. We are always connected. If you are living, breathing, walking, you are connected to something so much greater than you can even comprehend, because we're like the original cell phone, right? We're like, look, it's Wi-Fi. Like we really are in the space of like, because it's easily so fleeting, right? Life is so fleeting. And so when you see that they've come to that space of separation, it's like, what happened? What happened that cause you to believe that you're a completely separate thing, and then help just see them in that space. I don't even think
Yeah.
it's about helping people to move, like to guide them to something. It's just seeing, like, I honor you in that space of where you had that wound take place, but recognize that I am you and you are me, and we are a creation of one thing that keeps rippling through time and space. So in the space of prison ministry, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of wounds in that space,
Yeah,
but
there
there's
are.
a lot of repeat habits. There's a lot of energetic. So I bring my work into this, in ancestry into this, and the next layer of how that all folds out is we see I watched this in EMS as an EMT for 15 years. They always say, well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And it doesn't.
Right.
But what happens is when we're not connected to something bigger, when we're not open to healing our wounds, when we're not open to healing the traumas of our lives, when something diverts us or manipulates us into seeing ourselves as separate, we come to these spaces of packed prisons. And it's sad, but how are you showing up in that space and helping people to relight that candle?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Rebecca. And I have to say, right now during the pandemic, I have not been going to the prison physically because
Yeah,
everything's locked down. So I haven't been there since March of 2020. But I had been going for about 12 years. I started in October of 2008, going every week and doing Bible studies. And I've seen over the years, people do come with a lot of injuries, mental and emotional injuries, or that sort of thing. The people I work with are people who have some kind of faith in God or used to, and I teach classes on how to pray like Jesus, how all the healings that Jesus did. And we really get deep into that because that helps people realize that this can still happen today.
Mm-hmm.
I do all the women in the Bible. I have another one on all the angels in the Bible. People love that one. And then one on the Holy Spirit. And in this process of talking about these Bible characters, the men and women realize, oh, they're not very different from us, because some people, they don't really read the Bible very deeply. They think, oh, those people were so holy. Well, there were a few holy people, but there were a lot of people that made some big mistakes. Even like King David, a lot of them, nobody did not make any mistakes. And so we talk about that and how the lessons that those people learned related to their situation. I had a very interesting experience. Well, first, let me say in general, a lot of people say to me, they call me Mr. Early, because you're not supposed to get too cozy, personal with these people. But I mean, they become I feel like they're brothers and sisters, really. They're wonderful people, at least the ones that come to my classes. And so many times they say, oh, Mr. Early, you have restored my faith in God, or you have helped me so much. And, I don't really necessarily feel like I personally have done that much. I've just treated them with respect and said, well, let's think about this. Let's look and see if we can get any ideas. And people may be people don't always agree on every little detail on the theology thing, like we were talking about, but we're there to learn from each other. So I had this one experience where a woman came to my class kind of reluctantly. She had a big attitude. You could just tell it before you even talked to her. She had an attitude. And one of her roommates, I think, had convinced her, oh, no, you'll like him. She had sort of been burned by her church. She'd grown up in a church where you were not allowed to ask questions, because that meant you were expressing doubt, and you just had to accept everything they said on faith. We're right. This is the way you have to believe, and don't ask any questions. Well, she had questions. I had those kind of same questions when I was in high school, trying to decide, well, what do I really believe? And so I loved her questions. And I said, oh, yeah, ask your questions. She said, really? And and actually, the other women in the group loved it too because they'd had some of those same questions, but didn't didn't want to admit that they had those questions. And she asked questions that nobody else had ever thought about. So over time, and she had a pretty negative attitude about herself, and she was down on things. She really didn't believe in God that much, all these kinds of things. Over time, as she would ask these questions, I didn't tell her the answer because I said, well, you can answer that lots of ways. If you think of God as this great big man in the sky with thunderbolts, punishing you for every tiny little thing you do wrong, then you're going to answer that question one way. Something like, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? And I would say that's not the right question, because if you ask that question, you'll find a reason that may or may not be true. So then I said, well, if you believe God is this beneficent being that can't help or decides not to help, then you're going to answer another way. But if you believe that God is so loving and he always wants to help you, you're going to answer the question another way. And so all of a sudden, I was giving her permission to think for herself. And this happened over 2 years. So we got to the point where everybody loved it when she asked questions, and we'd kid her and joke, oh gosh, here we go again. But we learned so much. And the last day that she was in my class before she was released, she said to me, Mr. Early, I want to tell you something. When I came to prison 2 years ago, I felt terrible about myself. I felt terrible about my crime. I was estranged from my family because of what I'd done. I didn't have a faith in God. I was depressed and on 4 or 5 different medications. She said, now I feel great about myself and my future. I've made peace with my crime, and I've accepted what I did and tried to make amends. I've got a better relationship with my family. They're all supportive of me now, and I have a faith in God that I can believe in, and I'm not taking any of the medications anymore, and I'm not depressed. And it's all because I was in your Bible study group. It's like,
That's
whoa.
amazing.
Yeah. And really, I treated her as a child of God. The Bible says that we're made in the image and likeness of God. It doesn't say you're a miserable sinner to start with. And so what I do in my Bible studies, whether it's in the prison or in a church or just talking to somebody one-on-one, I say, well, let's start with the way God originally created us in his image and likeness. That's pretty good. Now, we go through the world and either the world throws mud on us or we jump in the mud ourselves. And we may think we enjoy that for a while, but at some point the mud dries and gets hard and cracky and we don't like it anymore. Well, the mud is never part of us. I don't care how miserable a situation you find yourself in. Maybe you've done all kinds of terrible things. That's just mud. It's not part of who you really are as a child of God. And so I kept using those kind of analogies, modern day parables, to help people realize. I even say to the ladies, did your kids ever get so dirty you didn't recognize them? And they all laugh. But one lady said, yeah, they played in the mud so much, I didn't know they were my kids. I said, well, what did you do? Were you afraid that mud was going to become part of them and it would never come off? She said, no, I put them in the bathtub and I scrubbed them and they got clean. And I think that's what God's love does to us. It removes the mistakes we've made, the bad negative feelings we have about ourselves, because that's not part of who we are way down deep spiritually, our true self. That's not who we are. So to answer this point, to kind of summarize, it's just like really discovering who we are spiritually in God's eyes. And I think that's how Jesus healed people. He saw somebody that was sick or crippled or blind or whatever, and he thought, oh, that's just part of the mud. I'm going to wash that away because that's not part of how God made them originally. That's my perspective anyway.
Yeah, no, and it's a really good one though, because it allows people to come to the space of seeing it on such a simple level. Like,
Yeah.
it's so simple. We human things so hard. Like we human the death out of things at times. And we make things so much more complicated than they truly need to be. And it really just comes down to those simple choices. Those simple choices and that shift in perspective of good people do bad things and bad people are good people deep down inside. Even the most screwed
Yeah.
up ones, it's just the things that have happened to them and the ideas that they've stepped away from or the things that they were never taught. Like there's so many different shifts. And so when we come back to the space of let don't judge. Oh wow, I think that one's in there. Like no judgment, and like letting go of preconceived notions of, oh, I'm bad because, or oh, I'm this because. There's so much social input, and especially these days. Oh my gosh, social media. There's like 18 different platforms people are pretending to be live people on. How are you
Right.
keeping the space of showing up and living in your light in those in the world today without taking on all of that? Because in the space
Yeah.
of going into the prisons and then you haven't been able to be in that space, you're on you have a website, you're on Instagram at the Bible Speaks to You, you are showing up in all these areas sharing the same words, but in all of these areas you have to find the balance, find the ability to stay you and to continue to share your word cleanly. So how
Yeah.
are you doing that? How are you?
That's a great question, Rebecca. Some days are better than others. But I try every morning to have some quiet, prayerful time where I'm not just studying the Bible, but I'm I'm closing my eyes and really praying, thinking about and trying to apply the ideas to my life. Uh, take any simple thing like love your neighbor as yourself. Well, that means you have to love yourself and your neighbor equally, back to the balance. And a lot of us, we love ourselves more than our neighbors, or we love our neighbors more than ourselves. And there's supposed to be a balance there. And so you have to work on it. You have to realize that you need that sometimes, that when things get out of balance. But I find that when I really connect with the divine in those quiet times in the morning, I try to do that first thing in the morning. I don't always. Uh, the rest of my day is much better because I have found a sense of connection, actually feeling that connection, not just talking about it, because I can talk about it, for hours. But it's one thing to say, oh yeah, God loves you, but for you to feel God's love for you, that's a totally different thing. And when you feel that, then all the other stuff is not appealing, is not attractive, is doesn't bother you if it hits you in the face. But if you're not connected with this universal presence of love, the dumbest little thing sets you off. And I have days like that too.
Well, and I love that you say that, like, because everybody's human.
Yeah. And
Like
so we keep working at it. Yeah.
every day you are showing up and your practice is a practice, just like medicine. It's a practice.
And
Nobody
yeah, it
is
is. And
right all the
so some of the other things is I do not watch TV. We don't have it. We don't even have a TV in our house anymore. I do try to keep up with the news. And of course, there's been a lot of news lately with what's going on in the election cycle and everything. But I try not to take in too much from what's going on. And like on Facebook or something, every once in a while I'll make a comment on somebody's feed, and you realize there's just not much point in it because you get sucked in and people misunderstand. Sometimes it seems like on purpose, because they are only trying to promote their point of view. There are some groups I'm involved in where there's actually a lot of mutual support, and so I'm a little more participatory in those things because I want to help people in whatever way I can. And again, that's kind of why I'm doing the podcast now, is trying to get a message out there of that there's hope, that God loves you. You're worthy of God's love. Sometimes we think, oh, well, God doesn't love me because I've done all these bad things. Well, that's a bunch of ridiculousness in my book, because even if you do all those bad things, he still loves you. Just like, I mean, my kids may have done some things when I was little that I didn't like, but I still love them. They deserve my love. They don't have to earn it. There's no way you don't have to earn God's love. He loves you regardless. Now, he doesn't like those bad things you do, but he's always trying to show more love to you. And we turn it off sometimes because we think we don't deserve it. But I think that's a bad theological perspective that some people have bought into over the centuries. And that's one of those things I'm trying to get back to, just love.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like love is not money. It is not a monetized thing. Like love is love. You can openly love. But I think you said something really, really poignant in the space of loving yourself. So many people have forgotten how to love themselves or don't see value in themselves and are disconnected from that space. And so what would you share with somebody in the space of learning to love themselves again so that they can love their neighbor, so they can love their child, so they can show up and love their spouse? Because I think it's a really funny thing, because in my work, watching people, I say, well, you're talking to me and I can already tell you that the love language that you're telling somebody to love you with isn't what your love language is. So somebody's speaking Spanish to you because you said, oh, I speak Spanish, but really you speak Japanese. So it's no wonder you're not on the same page here. So taking people to that space of like recognizing, like, if I love myself, why do you hate your neighbor? Well, you hate your neighbor because you hate yourself. Like,
Right.
let's love ourselves. Like, how are you helping people to connect back to that space of self-love?
That's such a good question. We could talk for hours about that. And I would probably enjoy that.
Yeah.
I think, let me tell you quickly, just a little bit of my journey. I've always known for decades that I should love myself. I've known that. But it wasn't until about a couple of years ago, I was praying about something one morning, and I just had this wonderful sense of, I'm supposed to love everyone in the world. So I was loving, just sort of theoretically, everyone in the world, trying to include the whole world in my love. And all of a sudden I realized, oh, I'm one of those people. So I do love myself. And I had to admit to myself that, okay, that doesn't mean I'm a perfect human being, but spiritually, I'm a perfect child of God. And I think, because we try, I think the reason we don't love ourselves sometimes is because we're looking at ourselves from a broken perspective. We're looking at ourselves through a wall of glass bricks, and everything looks distorted. Have you ever looked through, one of those walls, and everything, you can't even recognize somebody? And I think we look at ourselves through a mirror or a wall of glass bricks that's distorted, and we think, oh my gosh, that's me. I hate myself. And yet that's not who you really are, because if you take that distortion away, you realize, oh, I'm pretty cool I'm worthy of love after all. So one thing I say to people, whether it's them having to love themselves or someone else, I had a friend that, and I use this in the prison too. He really did not love his dad because his dad had abused him emotionally as a child. And I said, and his dad was coming to the end of his life. And I said, you have to be able to say to your dad, you love him before he passes on, or he's a very emotional, sensitive guy. And I said, you've got to say that to him, or you're going to regret it the rest of your life. And he knew I was right. And he was just having so much trouble. I said, imagine, and I had never heard anybody say this before, and since I've heard other people say it. So it just came to me at the moment. Imagine that your dad is a little baby and you're holding him in your arms, and he hasn't done anything wrong yet. And apparently his dad had been abused in certain ways. He had not had a loving family. So he was just repeating He was
The
doing the
better.
best he was doing the best he could, but he didn't know any better. He didn't have any anyway. So I said, imagine you're just holding your father as a little baby, and he's looking up at you with these sweet little baby eyes and giggling and gurgling, and you can love that. He said, yeah, okay, I can love that. I said, so I say that to people about themselves. Imagine you're holding yourself as a little baby before you've ever done anything good or bad, and you're just a pure little innocent bundle of babiness. you know um, just start with that. And I think that helps people get back to, oh, okay, originally there was nothing wrong with me.
Right.
And that's only a step in, I mean, that's a very human perspective, but I think that helps people take that step. And then I try to take it another step and say, okay, now let's talk about who you are spiritually as the image and likeness of God. That's even a fuller sense of what we're talking about, your innocence. And back to that analogy of the mud being washed away, that helps a lot of people. They realize, oh, I really am a good person underneath all this. And then it helps them start to see themselves in a different light so that they can love themselves and appreciate themselves. Sometimes I say, okay, well, make a list of all the things that are good about yourself. Okay, we can talk about the mistakes later or not, but just tell me the things that you love. Tell me what you love about life. And I said, okay, that's who you really are. And that helps them start to see and give them permission to see the good that's there, because we tend to, it's human nature sometimes, to focus on all the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to ignore that, but I think the more we focus on the good, we'll see more clearly that the bad is just the mud that can be washed away. It's not inherent in us. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the other thing is we know that what we focus on grows. So if we're
Yeah.
constantly focusing on the negativity is going to grow. And we've come to this space, even in socially in the world around us, of you're constantly bombarded with negative programming because it gets the most ticks, it gets the most
Oh
responses,
yeah.
it has the most people leaving a comment and tuning in and sharing their thought. And so it is the thing that's like, immediately people are like, well, what's the bad thing? Because we're being pushed in our conscious and unconscious and subconscious and super conscious space to go there and focus it on it. So it's taking the time to sit down and say, well, but I'm not bad. Like, look at, even in one day, if you can only say 3 nice things about yourself, that's 3 more than you said yesterday. And maybe
Yeah.
tomorrow it's 5. And maybe by the end of the month, you have 30 things that you love about yourself. And so you're constantly programming yourself to come back to that space of like, wait, let me create balance from this negative to positive. Let me create a real, true view, not a, what do they call that? A just not necessarily distorted, but I mean, it is distorted, but like all in one direction for whatever the reason. The word escapes me, but you know what I mean, guys.
Right.
A biased view. But I think that so many people need more of that, because I also recognize the space of where patterns take place. And like you already said it, he had been the son of somebody who he was emotionally abused by his father. Well, now come to find out, you find out that his father was abused far more than emotionally. And I guarantee that the person before that was abused even more. And so
Right.
everyone's doing the best that they can to move forward and do that bit better. Like,
Yeah.
so it's not overnight, you guys. Like, it's not overnight. People want that, like, one pill fixes all the things, and that
Well,
doesn't
and
happen. It's not a
well, yeah,
o'clock in the morning infomercial.
yeah,
It's life,
one
people.
pill. Yeah, no, you're right. One pill does not solve it, and one emotional, spiritual aha moment does not solve it. But because it's a journey it begins with those moments, and but again, I want to get back to this idea of perspective, because I've realized that the more that we look at things from the perspective of what is true in the kingdom of heaven, and I don't mean in some little pearly gates, streets of gold literal sense, because I don't believe that the Bible means that literally. But Jesus, the very first thing he said, that he was, and his primary message was that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. This reign of where love is in control, beauty is in control, harmony and peace are in control, and nothing unlike that can be present. And he said, that's at hand. That's right here, right now. You just can't see it because you're looking at it from the wrong perspective. And it's kind of like, I mean, some of my friends say, you're crazy, James. But I said, well, think about the radio waves in the room right now.
Mm-hmm.
I can't hear that music, but if I turn on a radio, the radio device can discern those radio waves and turn them into the music or the news or the program, whatever it is. And I think the kingdom of heaven is present. God's love, infinite love, is present right now. We just don't tune into it.
Yes.
Or sometimes we're listening to the static.
Yes.
But you have to tune into it to be able to hear it. And so when we do that, what is true about you in the kingdom of heaven right now? This is what I say to people. And they usually know the verse in the book of Revelation. It says, there's no pain, there's no sorrow, there's no tears, there's no crying, there's no more death. And that sounds pretty good. And I said, so if you're looking at yourself through that lens, from that perspective, you see, wow, I think that's pretty cool. Everything's okay. And because most people think you have to die before you get to heaven and it's someplace later, Jesus said, no, 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 no. It's right here, right now. You just have to he says the word repent. And a lot of times that word people think means, oh, you're so sorry for all the things you did wrong. And that it can mean that, but the word in Greek, the original Greek means, it's metanoia, and it means to completely change your thinking. To think again, to think in a new way, to think from a new perspective. And so I think what Jesus was saying is, quit looking at things from your limited perspective. Look at them from the perspective of what's going on in the kingdom of heaven, where God is in control. His love is everywhere. And that's going to change the way you see everything else. Right. If you look through the proverbial rose-colored glasses, everything's going to look pink and rosy. If you look through sunglasses, everything is going to look gray or green or whatever color your sunglasses are. If you look through I hate myself colored glasses, you're going to hate yourself no matter how good you are.
Right.
If you look through God hates me and I'm a miserable sinner, or God this or that, you're going to see everything tainted that way. Mm-hmm. But if you take off those glasses and just look at it through God's eyes, he loves you. He made you wonderful. There's a verse in the Bible, I don't remember exactly where it's in Psalms, it says, I am wonderfully made. The psalmist, I think, says, I am wonderfully made. Okay, I would invite all your listeners, everybody who's listening, to say to yourself, I am wonderfully made. God has made me glorious. It says we're just a little lower than the angels. Mm-hmm. That's pretty incredible.
That's pretty awesome, right?
So first you have to admit it. You have to acknowledge it. You have to say, well, okay, maybe I don't, even if you don't necessarily believe it, you can still say, okay, well, maybe it's true and I just don't believe it yet. I don't know. You got to start somewhere. You got to get on the merry-go-round somewhere.
Right. Exactly. So we're going to get ready to wrap up. And in the space of that, what is one thing that you're like, I have to say this, like they have to know this, they have to like hear this, in the space of like how to live free in the world today. It's a real crazy place. It's probably the craziest it's been since medieval times. But like, what, like, how to keep balance, or what one thing that you're just like, guys, if you could just know this.
I think, well, I'll probably say more than one thing. Quickly, I will say, one, I think you need time alone by yourself just to think and ponder. And I would suggest um, reading the Bible in a fresh way, like the book of John or something. Read the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, and see what's in your heart. Feel that presence of God. But you need to have those quiet moments. Some people fill their days with so much noise, and if nobody else is talking, they talk. And if they're by themselves for 5 minutes, they get lonely. Oh my gosh, I love to be by myself. I love to be with people. But the first thing I would say is you need some time to think and pray. Included in that, I would say, write in your journal. I write out questions like I'm writing a letter to God. Dear God, what about so and so and so and so? And then I write down what I feel like He's telling me. Have a conversation with God. Write it out in your journal. I go back and read that a year later. I'm thinking, wow. So that's one thing. Um, the other thing I would say is think about where you want to be. Ask God where He wants you to be instead of worrying so much about where you've been. You know, if you're driving a car, you look in the rear view mirror a little bit, but you got to keep your eye on where you're going. And so I think we need to decide, okay, well, I want to go toward a life that's free. Well, then ask yourself, well, what is freedom? What does freedom look like to me? What does that look like? And it's going to be a little different for everybody. But I think part of it is free to be yourself without all these outside influences,
Mm-hmm.
and be open to maybe talk to a good friend and say, what do you see from an objective perspective? That's hard because they might tell you some hard truth, but maybe they see something that can be helpful. That has to be in the right situation. Everything. I could go on, but I think those things are what I would say in particular.
That's fantastic. And so on point right now. Like right now, everyone says, "Oh, well, I've been alone because we've been quarantined and all the things."
Yeah.
But you guys, you are binge watching Netflix and scrolling social media. You're not by yourself. Put down your electronic, shut off your electronic. Give yourself the opportunity to disconnect and
Right.
just be in the presence of you and what else surrounds you.
Yeah,
Um,
and the other thing is, as far as we do need community, but we need not fake community like Facebook or whatever. So find, even if it's just one or two people you can have a Zoom call with or on the phone, you need community, someone that's like-minded,
mhm,
that can support where you're going instead of pull you back into where you've been. And
mhm.
I think that is so important, is to have a support team, whatever that looks like for you, that you can share ideas with. And sometimes it's not your family members. Sometimes it's a stranger like you and I met on the Pod Pals. You know, sometimes it's going to come from somebody that you've never met before, but you have a similar wavelength. So, you got to trust the journey to put you in contact with those people. But then I had a call with a lady yesterday. We just met, and she said, "Oh, we talked for 2 hours." And it was just so refreshing to find somebody so like-minded. It did me a world of good and did her a lot of good. And does it solve all my problems? No, but it 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 made me realize that I'm on the right track.
Mhm, mhm.
And so we need times by ourselves, but we also need some support uh, that can support where we're going.
That's fantastic. I love it. Thank you, James, for being here. You guys, if you are not connected with James, he is on Instagram at The Bible Speaks to You. His website is thebiblespeakstoyou.com. And he is James Early, and you can Google him and he will pop right up because I did. There's not a lot of James Earlys out there, so that works in your favor. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time to share with us. James, thank you for being here. Thank you for all the insights that you've given us today. And you guys, we will see you again next week. And if you have questions, don't forget, leave them in our comments. We do come back. We do tune into that space and answer those questions. And we even are making other podcasts from those questions where we answer you flat out. So have a wonderful day, and we will talk to you again soon.
Well, hey there. Thanks for listening to today's episode. We would love it if you would leave us a rating and review in your favorite podcast player. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode.